Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Can the federal government tell the states what to do? Tonight, how the feds get around the Constitution. One line about a small item in the president's speech the other night and the reaction to it struck me. You see, the president wants to raise the age at which students may legally withdraw from schools owned and run by state and local governments. All right, there is no authority in the Constitution for the federal government to regulate local public school education. President George W. Bush famously thumbed his nose at the idea of limited government when he partnered with the late Senator Ted Kennedy to establish the Federal Department of Education as a cabinet post. When President Obama made his statement about changing the age for leaving school during his speech, the Congress, Republicans and Democrats, roared their approval. In roaring, they demonstrated their ignorance of the Constitution. Let's go back to Government 101. The states formed the federal government and not the other way around by giving away some of their powers to the federal government. They all wrote down on a piece of paper just what those 17 powers were. On the same piece of paper, they also wrote that the powers not given away were retained by the states. The piece of paper, of course, is the Constitution. Regrettably, it has been amended by consensus. By that I mean so many people in the government, each of whom has taken a solemn oath to uphold the Constitution, have agreed to disregard it, that at times it has become meaningless. From time to time, Congress has decided that it wants to bring about uniformity in the laws of the states. Typically, these areas involve local government where the beauty is the absence of uniformity. The absence of uniformity is the essence of state sovereignty. When the states are free to legislate as they wish, we all have choices. Because the states are different, we can, as President Reagan was fond of saying, vote with our feet. So if you think taxes are too high in New Jersey, you can move across the Delaware River to Pennsylvania. If you think regulations are too burdensome in Massachusetts, you can move next door to the live free or die state, New Hampshire. But when the federal government takes over an area of state government that the Constitution has retained for the states, uniformity expands and our choices are reduced. The progressives in Washington, the big government types in both parties, like this uniformity because they like using the force of government to tell all of us how to live. The feds typically do this by bribing the states. In the 1980s, Congress offered the states hundreds of millions of dollars to repave their highways. The catch was that in return for the cash, the states were required to lower their top speed limits on those highways to 55 miles an hour. All states but South Dakota went along with this. South Dakota sued the feds, called this a bribe, argued that speed limits on state highways were not subject to federal regulation, and asked the court to permit it to accept the federal cash and still keep its speed limits where it wanted them, at the time 70 miles an hour. The Supreme Court ruled that Congress can attach strings to its cash giveaways. The court said that if you want the cash, you accept the strings. Question: who was the big government occupant of the White House who signed this bribe into law? Answer: Ronald Reagan, but that's another story. By doing this, however, all three branches of the federal government conspired to assault the Constitution in the name of cash. But the big loss here was for state sovereignty. You see, the states lost their power to regulate their own roads. Soon would follow more bribes in the form of federal cash in return for uniformity in blood alcohol limits for drunk driving prosecutions, achievement standards for students in schools, and now the age at which students can legally leave school and enter the workforce. Basically, in his State of the Union speech on Tuesday, the president offered to borrow money from the Chinese and give it to the states in return for the states raising the legal age at which students may leave schools from 16 to 18, and the Congress roared. Do you see how subtle, criminal manipulation of the Constitution can bring about the loss of freedom? The Congress is not only without competence to make uniform educational standards applicable all over the country, it is profoundly without the authority to do so. At this rate, all education rules will be uniform, and you will have even fewer choices and therefore less freedom. And yet again, Congress has exempted itself from the laws it has written. Just try showing up in Albany or Trenton or Sacramento or Tallahassee and tell the state legislators there that you have cash for them if they'll only enact the legislation you want. And you will see how quickly the feds will charge you with attempted bribery. Bribery of state officials is a very serious federal crime, except when the feds do it themselves. From New York, defending freedom, everybody's freedom, every night of the week. So long, America.